Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. In this First But Last episode, I want you to meet Audrey Cotherman. She is an author and writer. She works for the Casper Star-Tribune, and her home base has been in Wyoming since 1960. She is 89 years old. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you.
I first want to hear about your home base being here since 1960, and what was your journey to Wyoming?
Well, my husband was transferred with the St. Paul Insurance Company, and he assured me that they had a League of Women Voters in Wyoming, so I agreed to come.
Oh, that's good. And so that was a big part of your life?
It was, yes. I had lived in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I've gotten involved in the league early in life.
Okay, why was that important to you?
Oh, well, because it was real stimulation. We studied thoroughly things, and I became quite fascinated with how government works and public policy issues.
Okay, and when you got involved in the League of Women Voters, what year was that? How old were you?
Oh, I was about 25, 27 or so, I guess.
And what were your concerns, and what do you think the issues at that time were with women and equality?
Well, it wasn't too far from the McCarthy era, you see, and the League had been accused of being communist or communist sympathizing, and we were no such thing. We were, in fact, very, very much committed to self-government and involvement of people in their government and so on. We'd probably have called them patriots in that time, but we really cared about how people informed themselves and got involved and engaged in government.
Right. And why couldn't you just be involved in any group that was about voting? Why did it have to be a women's group? What made it different than just being in any voting organization?
Well, I don't know if I knew about any other voting organization. Of course, there were the parties. Parties are a little different because they have a point of view, and most of the League of Women Voter attracted people who wanted to study both sides of an issue and come up with solutions. And so I guess partly it was because at that time, legislators and congressmen really paid attention to what the League said and the positions that they took because they knew that we weren't partisan, that we didn't start out with the answer and then come up with the question.
I like the way you put that. And what has been your experience with women and equality in Wyoming? Because we're celebrating Wyoming being the first state to give women the right to vote. So what has been your experience here?
Well, I think when I lived in Casper in the 60s, and it seemed to me that the men that we worked with, especially legislators, were quite appreciative of the League. And I was involved in mental health and PTA and things like that. My experience later, when I was deputy state superintendent, was quite unpleasant. And suddenly it dawned on me that in my period when I was really learning and being perhaps more agreeable, and then later maybe I wasn't quite as agreeable because I could see so many injustices, that I don't think that women with power were appreciated quite as much as when we were very pleasant and easy to work with. And I think we did get more disagreeable. In other words, when people were not very nice to me, sometimes it was so way out of what I thought I was. I resented that. And it's a little like growing older, by the way. By the time you get older and people, because there's age discrimination, act as though you really haven't got a brain cell working, you get ornery. And then and they say, gee, older people are crotchety. Well, of course they are, because you've treated them like they're either not there or vacant in some way or another.
That's interesting. So you feel like your opinion as you grow older becomes less and less important because you're not part of this young, vibrant, coming up kind of.
Well, and you're not employed anymore. I do think it makes a difference if you have a salary, and a decent salary at that. Unfortunately, there's some connection between how much you earn and whatever respect you have. And that's not right, but it does seem to be a reality.
So in working in government, you felt the gender discrimination?
Oh, yes, there certainly was gender discrimination. I think not pervasive. We had very nice men to work with, for example, but we had a small group, for example, in our department that just really resented not only having a superintendent because she'd been elected, but a deputy who ran the department. And why did we need two women? I think they fully expected the CEO day-to-day operation to be run by a male. And that would have probably been a smart political thing to do. But a person that I had respected for years wanted me to do it, so I did.
Oh, that's interesting. And did you work as the deputy superintendent before or after you became the first director for the Wyoming Humanities?
After.
Oh, after. Okay. Mm-hmm. So my organization, Wyoming Humanities, which I'm so thrilled to have you on this interview because you were the first executive director. And how did the Wyoming Humanities come about? Did you help form it? What was that process?
Well, the law had been passed in Congress, setting up the National Endowment for the Humanities. Then there are some really wonderful university people who then tried to get the Wyoming started. And so they had already set some groundwork when I was hired. It's nice of you to say that I was the first, but I think there were some really good people involved, and they had already set up a board of citizens from around Wyoming, and that was, 71 or so, wasn't it?
We're coming up on our 50th anniversary.
Wow, how time flies. So that's, I had two friends that were involved on that board, John Hinckley from Powell and Lynn Simons from Casper. And so they advertised for an exec, and I thought, gee, that really blends. I have a English and history background, but all this kind of adult education experience. And I thought, hey, there's a job where I might actually be qualified. Mostly you find you're learning on the job all the time.
Right, and especially with an English degree, because there's not very many.
Yes, my mother came to my graduation from Hamline University in St. Paul and said, "That's nice, honey, but what can you do?" And of course, I was only 17 or 18, young enough at the time, so I thought, anything I want to. And I believe that to this day. I think a humanities education makes you employable for whatever you want to do. It may require additional training, but, the whole idea of trying to learn a little about the human condition that is now and ever has been, it kind of helps you with critical thinking and working with other people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is that what you write about when in the Casper Star? Is that what you do? What are your stories about?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. I whatever kind of occurs to me that week. Last week, I was thinking, hey, I think it's spring, and then it snowed the next day, and so I think I talked a bit about transitions and transitions in your life and what we do and don't do gracefully. They're a little philosophic, I'd say, but mostly things that other people know that just get a kick out of reading when somebody else expresses it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and if you can express it, that is a great gift.
Well, actually, it's hard work.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
Because writing takes a lot of rewriting.
Okay.
And you have to, I think in order to write, you really have to love language. And so even if you've written it once or twice, you think there's a better way of saying that. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of fun to explore other ways of saying things. Mm-hmm. So I rarely could sit down and write even a short piece and be satisfied with it. It takes rewriting.
Right. What do you think are some of your greatest accomplishments in 89 years of life?
I have 4 rather decent children, and who are not children anymore. And they in turn have children, and they care about the children and spend a lot of time with them. I think when all is said and done, probably raising some decent people who care about their communities and contribute something to the world. One son is a museum director. My daughter is a social worker. One of my sons is in business. The other can do practically any kind of building work. And they're nice people who care about their children. And that mattered to me.
And so who influenced your life? And how do you think you still influence, like, you had a passion for being in the League of Women Voters, and are you still involved in that? Do you still advocate for women's rights?
It isn't quite the same as it was before, and no, I'm not involved in that. I'm trying to be a little bit supportive of a new neighborhood theater. I still am interested in museums and helping to support them. And I still do I was going to say teach, but I think a better word would be I facilitate a writer's class of adult people over at Casper College. They have a wonderful program for adults over there called OLLI program.
Oh, okay. What does that stand for?
It's the name of the people who contributed. Right now, I can't remember. I can't pull that up. But they do a variety of things. They take trips. They have volunteers who say, I could teach a class about movies, or I could teach a class about history. And so there are lots of people involved. There are people older, and they are people that are still vital and engaged and learning.
Right.
And so it's fun to be with them.
Well, what is it that your son called and said to you when he retired?
He said he wanted me to congratulate him for retiring before I did. I said, why would you say that? I'm not getting paid anymore.
Oh, my gosh. At the age of 89, with all your life experience and being the first executive director of the Wyoming Humanities, what do you think that we should be passing on to our young people, and especially our young women? And how do you think life has changed for women right now?
Wow. Well, I think what we should be passing on is it really is important to get as much education as you can. Learn as much as you can. It's a lifelong process, actually. But I think I would encourage that more than anything. I also think it's important to establish the habits of civility, and that there's always something to learn from somebody else, and you can't if you're hostile to them or ideas that you don't hold yourself. I find that even with ideas that are quite alien to what I believe, if I like somebody, if I respect somebody, I can learn something from their ideas. It's always fascinating to see what assumptions they've made so that they've come to this conclusion. And sometimes what's really confusing, we've made the same assumptions. I think one of the classic ones is we all care about how our children turn out. But we don't all do the same thing to contribute to the process. I almost said make, because we really don't. We just influence a little bit. I think, for example, my grown children tell me, well, we always knew where the line was. Well, they didn't like it at the time, but they, as adults, say that was good. We always knew that what you stood for and what you expected, and we didn't always do it. But so the second thing, I suppose, I think it's a shame to reward children when they haven't given any effort to anything. I think you're doing a terrible disservice. And so I think you keep expectations high, and the higher they are, the more children accomplish. And instead, we seem to have a tendency to want to lower things so everybody succeeds. Well, I think everybody should feel like they've succeeded too, but I think they ought to see some relationship between cause and effect.
Right. Hard work and reward.
Well, I think so, but that may be quite generational.
Really?
Huh?
Well, I think it might be coming full circle again. I'm watching my grandchildren be raised. But what about women? What successes and strides do you think they've made toward equality? And has it changed significantly since you were a young woman?
I think it has changed. I don't think it's where it should be yet, but I think it has changed. There really was a glass ceiling in the 60s and 70s when I was just becoming an adult. And I think that women have more opportunities now. I realize that they are still not paid on the same scale as men, but I think they're making some progress. For example, I didn't work. By the way, I'm glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I was home raising my children. I mean, I was there in the morning, and I was kind of there when they came home from school. And in between, I was doing ligament voters and PTA and a whole bunch of other things. But I think that it is helpful to have somebody there. But I also think that there are lots of women who either can't stay home because they have to work, or they just simply want to work. They enjoy working, and so they ought to have that option. I think we've made some progress. I just think it's been so slow. I never was, you have to understand that I work more at the policy level. In other words, if something needed to be done, for example, we were working on public health nursing here in Casper years ago. And we knew that if we could meet with one of the really wonderful doctors in town, a heart specialist, and he saw the value in public health nursing, we would probably have a better chance of getting it passed. I was not, and nor am I even inclined to this day, to march. I suppose it really does draw attention to things, but I'm not sure that it changes things. I think to change something takes a lot of relationship building and determination and stick-to-itiveness, and that it's a very gradual process. And so my daughters and my grandchildren, my granddaughters march, but I never had the urge to do that.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like you have a lot of experience, age, and wisdom. Do you think wisdom goes with age?
Oh, I'm not at all sure that I'm not as foolish as I always was. In fact, I think the more I can think like a child, sometimes the better off I am. I love to take walks with little people because they just open up a whole new world. Even when they just look at nature, I think sometimes we need to be more childlike in how we approach things. You get too sophisticated, you don't see some things sometimes that it takes a child to show you. I remember walking up the Cooper Mountain That's down by Laramie. I have a cabin there. And we walked up the mountain and across the mountain, and I was holding on to my 5-year-old hand because it was kind of steep in places. So when we got down, I said, "Thank you so much for holding my hand." And he said, "Yeah, I thought if I let it go, you'd roll down the mountain like an Indian rubber ball." And
my gosh.
He thought it was, first of all, he thought he was helping me, keeping me from falling. And secondly, I thought, what imagery? I wish I'd have thought of that.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Oh, my gosh. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Audrey.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the Equality State. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.